Valorant 7.09 is finally here, and as the meta has started to establish and key changes have been made, there are huge mix-ups in the meta at large. So we're going to be breaking it all down, including ISO's position in this video, so let's get started. Of course, right off the bat, we gotta talk about the only F-tier agent, still the F-tier, will continue to be the F-tier until she receives some pretty massive buffs, and it's none other than Jett. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually Deadlock. Now, if you haven't got the memo already, I don't know what rock you've been living under, but Deadlock is severely underpowered, and she's so weak in fact that there has been articles, videos, giant rants tailored to just talking about Deadlock, and the developers have already confirmed that Deadlock buffs are coming down the pipeline. Now, we have no idea when those buffs will be, but we do know that if a character is so weak that they are going to be already slating in buffs, and they're telling us this ahead of time so that we can stop talking about it. Yeah, the character's really weak. Right now, I would not suggest grinding her because we really don't know what's going to happen to the character. She could get a rework, her abilities could be dramatically changed, so if you grind her and get good with her now, you could be playing a much different character come a freaking month or so. So definitely keep that in mind. You know what else you should keep in mind? Wall hacks. And no, I'm not talking about actual wall hacks. I'm talking about our brand new wall hacks course, where it's going to go over every single common position players like to play on every single map and how they look to reposition throughout the rounds so that you can essentially track players through walls. I know it sounds complicated, but we make it all simple to remember with a couple of easy tricks that our coaches have put together through their years of experience. Any one of you could be a game sense god. All you need is the right tools, which are available over for you at SkillCapped. And if you don't believe me, we got our rank improvement guarantee, so if you don't climb, you don't play. More on that at the end of the video. Now, before we get into the D tier, I need to make a special tier for what I would call the ranked carries. So these are 3 characters that don't quite make sense to put in any tier list because they are extremely powerful for ranked play and in set conditions, but for pro play, coordinated play, or anything in between, these characters fall flat. So it feels weird to say that they're bad, but it also feels weird to say that they're good. Get me? And the first character that we got to talk about is undoubtedly Phoenix, a really fantastic character for ranked play, capable of filling all of the gaps in your terrible teammates, whether you need to clear a cubby, flash yourself onto point, wall off at op angle, the list goes on and on. Not to mention you have such an easily accessible ultimate that you get to farm that over and over again, and as you start popping off, you get to ult more, and your ult gets information, a chance to get kills, take space on site. I mean, come on. This character has pretty much everything that you would need to solo carry and climb, and is a fantastic ranked stomper. But of course, if you're looking to scrim, if you're looking to try to play any coordinated play, if you're playing in a stack, Phoenix starts to lag behind in those environments. But in the chaotic nature of the Wild West that is ranked Valorant, Phoenix is amazing, and he deserves his own special tier. Now, speaking of special tier, I have some special tiers when I shoot a goddamn Yoru clone, which is ironically the next character on this list. I mean, what kind of self-respecting person would main Yoru? Okay. But all jabs at Casey aside, Yoru is a fantastic character when you become really competent with him. He's a character that has a very low win rate in the lower ranks of play, but once you get to Immortal and beyond, all of a sudden, you are unlocking things that no other character can do. You're pulling off clutches that no other character could be a part of, and you're becoming this like omnipresent force that is just really difficult to play around properly, because it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, where if a Yoru knows exactly when you can afford to shoot something or not, they can play around it. They can put all types of traps and mix-ups and all sorts of things that can become really impossible for you to deal with all of them perfectly, and it feels like a really good Yoru is literally in your head. But keep in mind that all of that stuff works a lot better on the individual micro level, so for ranked. But when you have teams that can all do things for each other, you know, act the fool or act the pawn to do an action that may or may not get swept up by the Yoru, but your team would quickly deal with it. This makes Yoru a lot less effective when you have perfect communication, but only when you do. So anything outside of that, all of a sudden Yoru is fantastic. So for ranked play, he could be one of the best characters in the game, but that one requires you to have really great expertise on the character, and 2, it's only going to be applicable in ranked and not in pro play. Now, the last but certainly not least character in this special category is Reyna. And Reyna is a phenomenal ranked character, one of the highest win rates in ranked out of every single freaking agent. But of course, this character is a solo carry god, a pub stomper, and gonna be an amazing character if you want to get to Ascendant, Immortal, or even Radiant. But step forward into any strategic game, coordinated session, scrims, or anything in between, and all of a sudden Reyna starts to fall flat. Another thing that's important to understand is that Reyna is often tied to your mechanical skill. Many of her abilities require you to get kills in order to access, and it's not very often that you'll see a Reyna not actually get a lot of kills and like silently carry a game, where you could do that on a lot of other characters because you can play the strategic game, because you can help your team. You don't necessarily need to frag out on every character to carry, but with Reyna, in a lot of ways, you kind of do. That being said, you don't actually need crazy aim to frag out on Reyna, which is why it's not a coincidence that you see a lot of Reyna players on top. And there's a bunch of nuance that goes into dominating on Reyna, but it's really not that hard if you know what you're doing. And that's why we go over it all in our brand new Reyna course, where we isolate every concept that you actually need to climb in about 10 minutes, so you can check it out down below. Now, the next category we got to talk about is the D tier. And these are characters that are suffering for a number of different reasons, either the lack of pick rate, the lack of power, meaning they need buffs, or there's just flat out better competition for what they do in another agent, and that agent's getting the pick rate instead of them. Now, the first character is Sage, and unfortunately, even though Sage is a really great ranked character that has a rather high win rate in ranked, so I'm not telling you to drop Sage out of nowhere or anything, but understand that the reason that she's currently fairly weak in the meta primarily comes down to a couple of things. Number one, Icebox is her best map, and right now it's out of the map pool, so when it is, she is just not going to get as much pick rate relative to that. If any character's best map leaves the map pool, then that's going to hurt their pick rate, but that's not the only problem with Sage. A lot of the maps that she used to see dominance on, all of a sudden she just doesn't see any play anymore. Like Split, she used to see a ton of play on Split, but now she sees a fat nothing. And mainly we're either seeing no Sentinel setups on Split, or we're seeing Cypher, and that's about it. And then on a lot of the other maps, we're seeing Killjoy instead. So it's a combination of there being more competitive options, and Sage has just gone through probably more nerfs than just about any other character. So yeah, she could most likely use some buffs, but then it's unclear, would she be too powerful in ranked? You let us know in the comments down below. Now, the next character we got to talk about is unfortunately Gekko, and Gekko has actually received a little bit of buffs here and there over the past couple of patches, but really Gekko is still just a bit underwhelming compared to the multitude of incredibly powerful freaking initiators. I mean, just look at the list of initiators that are just freaking phenomenal. Like, these are all good. Sova, Skye, freaking Kayo, Fade. I mean, they're all amazing. And Gekko is kind of just the worst of the bunch. It's not that he's necessarily bad. And in a world with less initiators, he would probably see a good amount of play. But currently right now, I would think that we would either need like mass initiator nerfs, which is probably not going to happen any more than they already have, or we're going to need some dramatic Gekko buff, which I do imagine would happen at some point or another. Doesn't mean that he's unplayable, and I think the difference between him and a lot of the other initiators is pretty close, so he's not actually that much worse, and you're going to get extra bonus points in ranked playing a character that people are less familiar with playing around. People don't really talk about that enough, because that gives you extra percentage points when people don't have like a set strategy to play up against you because you're a little bit untraditional. But still, even with that in mind, I think Gekko is a little underpowered right now and is sitting in D tier. Now we're actually going to move on to the C tier, and the first character that we definitely got to talk about is Chamber. And Chamber is actually seeing a little bit of play here and there. There are some teams that are experimenting with the character a bit. Even though this character is definitely still amazing for ranked play, I think he's dramatically underpicked compared to how good he is in ranked, mainly because all the nerfs. I think a lot of people were used to his old play style and then just ditched him when he got heavily nerfed. But when you take something that was probably one of the most broken agents of all time and you heavily nerf him, it turns out he's still actually quite good. And the thing about Chamber that is still strong is he's amazing for ecos. He's amazing for the economy of your team as a whole. He has the ability to clutch up rounds, and much like a lot of other sentinels, you can cut off the rotations of the enemy team and gather information while doing it. Chamber is still a really phenomenal character in a lot of ways, but I do think that he still lags behind many of the other really powerful characters and strategies that are seeing play right now. He's just sitting at the bottom of C tier. Next up, we do got to talk about Neon, and Neon has had times where she has really shined. Specifically on Fracture is her best map. Unfortunately, right now, out of the map pool, so you're not gonna be able to abuse the Neon Breach run it down as you normally have been, and that's a bit unfortunate for her pick rate. But even more than that, the thing about Neon is that she's rather one-dimensional when compared to the other dominant duelists, especially when we consider Jett and Raze. These characters are very flexible. They can definitely work well with another initiator, but they don't rely on it to get value, and oftentimes they can find ways to get value by themselves. And when you compare Neon to the head-to-head against these characters, she oftentimes falls flat, and there are so many other strategies that you would rather play if you're not going to be rocking either Jett or Raze, that it makes her hard to justify. Not saying that she's bad, but she's specific, and currently in the meta, I think that she just lags a bit behind her competition. But for ranked play, if you're a Neon God, you could definitely run it down, but for this meta tier list, she's going to be sitting in C tier. Now, of course, many of y'all have been curious about ISO, and currently there isn't enough data to definitively place him in the meta at large. There's a lack of pro play and just not enough consistent grinding in the various ranks of play, but we can make some assumptions based on his kit and how he's going to fit into ranked and the meta as a whole. Now, number one, regardless of how good ISO is, he's definitely going to be a ranked stomper. As an aim-centric duelist that has a cool design, he's going to be picked a lot, and you're going to be expected to play against him a lot no matter what, so he's probably going to have more representation than his power level regardless of how strong he is. Now, that being said, oftentimes this character is going to feel a bit like a Reyna-esque character, where if you're really popping off and you're just the best player in the lobby, you're able to take over the entire lobby, but there isn't as much strategic depth to a character like this, as opposed to some of the necessary duelists like Raze and Jett. This character just doesn't have the same tools that those duelists have, and as a result, he's probably not going to take either of their slots in the meta. Now, all of his abilities are fine, but I think the one that is the most powerful is definitely contingency, because being able to have a wall that you can throw out and get your team onto point during rushes is legitimately super powerful, and maybe that ability alone can enable this character to be higher than the C tier, but for now we're gonna put him in a safe C tier, even though there's a chance that he could eventually be moved up to B. Now, the last character that I wanted to talk about in C tier is definitely Harbor. Harbor is a character that is always gonna be a role filler. Most of the time he's being played in double controller setups, specifically with Viper on maps like Breeze, and it's a really fantastic way to lock down a site, have extra utility for retakes, and just diversify the way that you approach a map as a whole from a strategic point of view. That being said, he really falls flat on most maps as a solo controller, and I really do think that most of the time, if you can't run the dual controller setup, I wouldn't even suggest playing him in ranked, which is going to be very uncommon unless you're trying to set it up specifically. And there's really nothing that wrong with Harbor, but he's just always going to be niche in his application. In the current state of his, he's never going to be someone that is just dominating the meta unless they dramatically buff him in one way or another, so he's going to be sitting in the C tier. The next up, we do got to move it up to the B tier, and these are really solid characters that are seeing substantial amounts of play. They're characters that are established parts of the meta, and they're very freaking strong in a specific way. So first off, we got to talk about Brimstone, and Brimstone's not seeing a ton of play on every map, but he is seeing maxed out play on one map, and that's Bind. That's really important, because when you see a map that is just completely dominated by one agent, that has like a map meta. There's a map meta around Brimstone, and that means that this character is a necessary part of any pro scene, any scrim setting, any meta, because he is always going to be played eventually. Most of the time, you could probably dodge the maps and stuff, but in the long run, you'll run into a map, and that just means that you'll run into Brimstone. And Brimstone really is necessary for Bind, but he's also pretty good for a lot of other maps as well, even though he might not be the most optimal for ranked play, simply due to the fact that he has really good stalling ability. He's really easy to flex to, even if you're not a controller main, and his smokes can do the job on most maps, not the maps that need Viper as a line smoker, but almost every dome smoking map, he can do the job like good enough to actually fulfill the requirements to get onto points and actually execute certain strategies. That he's a very, very solid ranked character as well. We know this even more so because Brim has some of the highest ranked win rates, so that's a really big deal. But lineups are super important to learn on Brimstone, but they can be frustrating to learn. So we put all the top 100 on the SkillCapped website in our lineup playbook, and these are the best ones that are going to help you win very quickly, so check it out right now down below. The next character that we got to talk about is actually Astra, and Astra is a character that sees not as much of a stacked pick rate, but does see pick rate here and there in some dual controller setups and on maps like Split and Lotus and other maps in between. She's honestly really strong, and she's a character that need a certain amount of coordination that makes her better. This means that she's going to be better in the higher ranks. She's going to be better in coordinated play than she is in the lowest tiers of play. I would say like your access to like all of the powerful strategies that she enables is going to be not that consistent in the low tiers of play, and you'd probably be better off playing someone else like Brimstone. But as you start to get higher and higher levels of understanding, higher and higher lobbies, Astra starts to shine more and more and becomes a really phenomenal character. So yeah, for these reasons, she's in the B tier. The next up in the B tier, we do got to talk about Fade, and Fade is still seeing a good amount of play. On Sunset, she looks to see quite a bit of play, although it is a bit early to make those deductions. And on Lotus, she's still seeing quite a bit of play as well. And Fade is a fantastic character, make no mistake. Good in ranked play, good in pro play alike. But she's really only being held back because there are still 3 initiators that are really, really strong and seem to be more applicable in more situations than she is. We're kind of entering the territory where the characters we're talking about don't really necessarily need buffs. It's more about their context in the meta as a whole, and that there's just other options that might be a bit more competitive than her. She's a fantastic character when she's good, and I think she's great for ranked play, but still lagging behind some of her competitors just a little bit. And last up in the B tier, at the very tippy top, we have Breach. And Breach is a really solid character, seeing play on a multitude of maps, a little bit of Split, a little bit of Lotus, but quite a bit on Haven, actually becoming a pretty established part of the Haven strategy. Giving you some extra flexibility to take space on defense is something that is really strong, and Breach can enable that very, very well. Even though some of his best maps are out of the map pool, he's still a rather solid pick, which speaks to his power. And I know that he operates a lot differently than many of the other initiators, not actually giving you information, which is very different from the other ones. But even in spite of that, he's still really, really great at setting up a duelist, and he's also phenomenal in ranked play. In duo queue, not as much in solo queue. You can definitely make him work if you're good enough. Now, let's move on to the A tier. These are characters that are just really establishing themselves as just the best characters in the game. They're all good for different reasons, and really the only thing that separates the A and the S tier most of the time comes down to competition, because they're all very, very strong, but some of them have more or less competition than others. First off, in the A tier, we do got to talk about Kayo. Kayo with the maxed out Ascent pick rate, one of the needed picks on Ascent, really high pick rates on maps like Breeze, and actually being experimented on Sunset as well. Kayo is just kind of built for Ascent in very similar ways that we talked about Brimstone. He has a map that is just all his. In addition to that, has other maps that he's being experimented on as well. Very, very strong of a character, very unique of an effect, and especially because you can use his knives to gather information in a lot of the choke points and deny rushes through the wall from quite a bit of ways. That's just really, really strong, and Kayo's one of the best characters in the game right now. Now, quite a step up though, we have Skye, who is seeing a maxed out pick rate on Split and Bind, and seeing a lot of pick rate on other maps as well. She's not only just kind of dominating one map, she's dominating 2, and this is in spite of all the nerfs that she received quite a bit back. So it just shows that even in the wake of her nerfs, she's still one of the best characters in the game, which is absolutely crazy. A really, really strong character, and definitely one of the best characters in the game. Now, actually stepping up to the next tier, we have Raze. Raze is almost a 3-peat with maxed out pick rates on Split, on Bind, almost on Lotus, and still experiments on maps like Sunset. Raze is freaking phenomenal. Not only is she my pick for the best all-around character to climb with in ranked, but she's phenomenal in the meta at large, capable of taking space, capable of applying pressure in a way that most other characters can't. She's a duelist with information gathering abilities as well. Really, she's kind of the all-in-one package that is really only just lacking the ability to abuse ops like Jett can. So that's really the only thing that is really kind of holding her back. And of course, there's certain maps that favor Jett right now a little bit more in the meta, but all in all, still a phenomenal character, and really only a smidge away in pick rate from many of the top contenders. But coming off of 7.09, we see a lot of nerfs to the character. Nerfs to paint shells, nerfs to blast pack, and overall overall, this is going to make the character less effective, but it is important for you to understand that it doesn't fundamentally change why Raze is good, in a very similar way that Jett is still one of the most viable characters in the post-nerf world. Raze is still going to be one of the strongest characters in the game. She still can take space very quickly, she still can break tons of utility, and she still combats the meta in a very unique way. Yes, she's going to be weaker, and she's going to lose percentage points because of that, but she's still going to be the second best duelist in the game, and she's still going to be one of the best ranked picks in the game as well. Now, last up at the tippy top of the A tier is Sova, with almost a maxed up pick rate on Ascent, really high pick rates on Haven, on Breeze, and this character is just very strong. I mean, everyone knows just how powerful Sova can be, and really he's only here because there's just a lot of competition for the initiator spot. Like in some of the characters we're going to talk about in the S tier, there's not nearly as much competition for what they can do, but there's a ton of competition that is eating away Sova's pick rate. We just think about all the competitive initiators. It's freaking Kayo, Skye, Breach, Fade. I mean, all of these, and we're not even talking about Gekko, who isn't really that far off from some of these top contenders either in power level. And that's just way different when we look at like the duelist category, where there's really like only 2 real contenders in the duelist category, when there's like 5 real contenders in the initiator category. Just a way more competitive role, and that's really holding it back. But you could imagine in a world with a lot less initiators, Sova would reign, and that's kind of what used to happen back in the old metas. But now he's kind of being kept in check. He's having a reasonable pick rate, but still has a maxed up pick rate on a couple of maps. Very strong character. Now, at the very bottom of the A tier, we do have to talk about Cypher, because the buffs for this character were huge, and it absolutely made this character amazing, especially for ranked play. Trapwire was an ability before that often got destroyed if opponents really used their abilities and were disciplined in trying to take it out. And while as a Cypher you could get creative about how you place it, the reward was not that much, considering that if there was a joint rush, the trapwire would just break by itself, and most of the time it wouldn't always result in you being able to get a kill safely. But that's no longer the case anymore after these changes. With the fact that it keeps reconcussing and the fact that it concusses faster, you're going to be able to almost guarantee a stoppage if you can connect with the trapwire. This means that Cypher has become an amazing rush stopper, and especially when we talk about ranked play, if opponents aren't disciplined in clearing out trapwires and they don't dramatically slow down their engagements, they're gonna walk face first into it and just die like crazy. But if they go slower, you get value because you're not getting rushed down every single round. So no matter what happens, you're gonna be getting a ton of value out of this character. He's incredibly more consistent than he was before in his most powerful ability, and all in all, Cypher is now picking up tons of percentage points all over the place, and definitely not a character that you should sleep on, especially right now. While the meta hasn't quite adapted to him fully, it's a great time to grind him and get some free percentage points. Now we're moving on to the S tier, and these are the dominant characters right now in the meta and look like they're going to continue to be the best characters for the foreseeable future. First off, we do got to talk about Viper. Viper's just absolutely needed. She's just 100% needed on maps like Breeze, maps like Bind, experimented with on maps like Split, Sunset, and Lotus. She has so many different situations where she's good, either as a solo line smoker or as a duo smoker in a lot of setups, playing with Harbor or Astra. She's just really unique, and I don't really imagine she'll leave the S tier until there's a line smoker that can compete with her for her pick rates on cracked out maps. Because right now, Harbor's the only other line smoker, right? And it's never Viper or Harbor. It's Viper and Harbor or just Viper. It's never a competition, right? She's always on top. And until we get a line smoker that can ever compete with her, she's going to maintain on top, especially right now when there's maps like Breeze that are in the map pool that favor her so heavily. I mean, it's just hard to kind of put her down. Next up, we do got to talk about Jett. Jett is just kind of still her. She's still her. Not only one of the best characters in ranked play for just solo carrying or pretty much just carrying in general, but in pro play, all those giant nerfs to the character didn't put a dent in how strong she is. It's fundamental to her kit what she can do, like taking space on point, abusing ops, being able to be fluid in the middle of a entry, just buying time for your team to catch up and clear utility, having an amazing eco because you have knives. All these things together just create this agent that it doesn't really matter how you mess with these numbers. numbers, she's still going to be phenomenal. And like I said, there is not a lot of competition in the duelist category. There's literally only Raze, and Neon is pretty dependent on an initiator, and she's pretty map dependent. Outside of that, the other duelists, the Yoru, the Phoenix, Reynas, these characters are not really meta certified, or like they're much more ranked pub stompers. And in a world where like Jett and Raze didn't exist, it's not like these duelists would rise to take their spot. It's just that duelists wouldn't see play. That's the difference. When we look at initiator roles, if Sova didn't exist, other initiators would fill that gap. But that's not the way it is with duelists. It's like these duelists do a very specific thing that we like. If they didn't exist, the duelist role as a whole wouldn't exist in the meta. So that's very, very important to understand. But if you're really looking to skyrocket in rank, we recommend checking out our Jett course, where we break down exactly how top Jett mains like Demon 1, Dirk, and Tens get crazy value on this agent. Now next up, we do got to talk about Killjoy. Killjoy is still kind of just on a rampage, seeing maxed out pick rate on Ascent, Lotus, Haven, still being experimented with on Sunset. Yeah, she's just super freaking strong. She did receive that ult nerf that didn't really do anything to her pick rate, to be honest. She's gonna maintain this all-star status for as long as she maintains this state. As long as she's this busted, she's gonna be just completely warping the meta around her for both ranked and pro play. And I know she's not always the most flashy character to grind, but she is one of the best characters to climb with right now, and you're gonna have a really easy time shooting up the ranks if you get competent with her. She's just so reliable, so consistent. Just having a Killjoy on your team on a lot of these maps give you a huge win percentage in your favor. Just a really phenomenal character that is hard to kind of bet against. The only other character that has been surprisingly jumping up the meta right now is Omen. And Omen has always been like an A-tier agent, but specifically Sunset seems to favor Omen a lot. And when you add a new map in the map pool that favors him, when he already has Ascent, Lotus, and Haven that he's seeing good amount of play on, and even Split where he's being experimented on, now he's just all of a sudden really establishing himself as like a very, very good character that is seeing a lot of freaking play, where you're going to run into a ton of Omens. We already know he's one of the best ranked characters in the game, period. And I mean across roles, doesn't even matter. Amazing at lurking, does his job, helps your team rush. There's just so many things that he does so well. But he's also a phenomenal meta character that is seeing a ton of meta pick rate as well. So yeah, right now he's at the very tippy top, but all the A and S tier agents are just freaking insane right now. So definitely keep that in mind. And there are a lot of other agents in the B and C tiers that are very good as well, especially in ranked play if you learn to master them. But definitely let me know if you agree or disagree with any of the agents that we put on this tier list. Thank you so much for coming by, and we'll see you next time.